She stood on her father's dying land with a rifle aimed at a stranger's heart. But it wasn't fear that made her hands shake. It was the realization that she might actually pull the trigger just to prove she could still protect something. The Apache rider didn't flinch, didn't beg, just waited, dust settling around his boots like he'd been standing there long before she arrived. "I'm not here to take anything," he said quietly, "just offering work for a meal." Clara Whitfield had turned away plenty of drifters, but something in his stillness made her lower the gun. Multimt. If you're ready to walk with Clara through the desert heat, broken fences, and the kind of love that's built with calloused hands and quiet promises, then stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The Arizona sun didn't forgive. It pressed down on Clara Whitfield's shoulders like a hot iron, bleaching the color from her cotton dress and pulling sweat from every pore. She stood at the gate of her father's ranch, her ranch now, though the words still felt foreign in her mouth, with one hand shading her eyes and the other gripping the worn wooden post that marked the property line. The rider came from the east, a dark shape shimmering through the heat waves that rose from the desert floor. Clara's first instinct was to reach for the rifle leaning against the fence. Her second was to wonder if she had the strength left to aim it. She'd been alone for 6 months. 6 months since her father, Samuel Whitfield, had collapsed in the barn with his hand pressed to his chest and his breath coming in shallow gasps. 6 months since she'd buried him on the hill, overlooking the canyon beneath the twisted juniper he'd always loved. 6 months of waking before dawn, working until her muscles screamed and falling into bed too exhausted to cry. The ranch was dying with him. Fences sagged, the barn roof leaked, the well pump groaned like an old man every time she worked the handle. She'd sold off most of the cattle just to keep food on the table, and the garden she'd tried to plant had withered in the relentless heat. Neighbors offered pity but little help, most of them struggling just as hard, and none of them inclined to believe a woman alone could hold on to land this unforgiving. Clara grabbed the rifle. The rider drew closer, his horse moving at an easy walk. She could make out details now, broad shoulders, a dark hat pulled low, clothing dusty enough to suggest he'd been traveling for days. He sat his saddle with the kind of loose confidence that came from years in it, but there was no swagger in his posture, no threat she could name, and yet she raised the rifle to her shoulder. The rider stopped 20 yards out, both hands visible on the saddle horn. He didn't speak immediately, just studied her with the patience of a man accustomed to being met with suspicion. "That's close enough," Clara called out, hating the waver in her voice. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was low, calm. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't." A lie, and they both knew it. He shifted slightly in the saddle, and Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. But he was only reaching up to tip his hat back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind. High cheekbones, dark eyes that didn't look away when she met them. Apache, she realized, though his clothing was a mix of frontier practicality, canvas trousers, a faded work shirt, boots that had seen better years. "Name's Rowan Greyhawk," he said. "I'm traveling through, headed west. Saw your place from the ridge and thought I'd ask if you might have work." "I don't." "Fair enough." He started to gather his reins. "Wait!" The word escaped before Clara could stop it. Rowan Greyhawk paused, his expression unchanged, and she felt her face heat with something other than sunburn. What was she doing? She didn't need help, couldn't afford it even if she did. And bringing a strange man onto her property, an Apache man at that, with the town already whispering about her like she was some kind of scandal, was asking for trouble. But the fence behind her was held together with wire and prayers. The barn roof wouldn't survive another monsoon, and she was so damn tired. "You said work," she heard herself say. "What kind?" "Whatever needs doing." Rowan's gaze moved past her, taking in the sagging gate, the overgrown yard, the barn with its missing shingles. "Looks like plenty. I can't pay much. Wasn't asking for much. Hot meal and a place to sleep would do." Clara lowered the rifle slowly, though she didn't set it down. "One night." "Yes, ma'am." "And you sleep in the barn." "Understood." She stepped aside, her heart hammering as she watched him ride through the gate. This was foolish, reckless. Her father would have, but her father was gone, and she was alone. And maybe that was exactly why she needed to take this risk. Rowan dismounted near the barn, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. His horse was a sturdy buckskin gelding, well cared for despite the dust. He loosened the cinch and pulled the saddle, carrying it one-handed into the barn without asking where to put it. Clara followed, rifle still in hand, watching as he found an empty stall and set his gear down carefully. He moved like someone who knew how to exist in other people's spaces without claiming them, keeping his hands visible, his movements slow and deliberate. "There's a pump by the trough," Clara said. "Water's good." "Appreciated. Supper's at sundown. I'll ring the bell." Rowan nodded, already turning to tend his horse. Clara watched him for another moment, the broad line of his shoulders, the quiet competence in his hands, then forced herself to walk back to the house. What had she just done to him? The afternoon stretched long and hot. Clara threw herself into the endless list of chores that defined her days, feeding the chickens, checking the irrigation ditches, mending a torn section of her dress that she'd been ignoring for weeks. She tried not to think about the stranger in her barn, but her eyes kept drifting toward the weathered structure, watching for movement. When the sun finally began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust, she went inside to prepare supper. There wasn't much. Beans she'd cooked that morning, cornbread from yesterday, some dried beef she'd been rationing. She set 2 plates on the small table, then stood staring at them, second-guessing everything. The dinner bell was an old triangle her father had hung by the porch. Clara struck it twice, the sound ringing clear across the yard. Rowan appeared a few minutes later, hat in hand, his face and hair damp from the pump. He'd washed the worst of the trail dust away, though his clothes still carried the stain of long travel. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, waiting. "Come on up," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. He climbed the steps and followed her inside, his eyes moving over the small cabin, the stone fireplace, the simple furniture, the quilts her mother had made hanging on the walls. If he thought it humble, his face didn't show it. He simply removed his hat and stood until Clara gestured toward the table. They sat across from each other, the silence heavy but not quite uncomfortable. Clara served the food, aware of his eyes on her hands, the careful way he accepted what she offered. "This is good," Rowan said after his first bite. "Thank you." "It's just beans." "Still good." They ate without speaking for a while. Clara found herself studying him between glances, the way he held his fork, the deliberate pace of his eating, like someone who'd known hunger and learned not to rush. There were scars on his hands, old ones, the kind that came from years of hard work. "You said you're headed west," Clara finally said. "What's out there?" "Don't know yet." Rowan's lips quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "That's why I'm going." "Running from something?" "No, ma'am, just traveling." She wanted to ask more, where he'd come from, what kind of life left a man wandering the territories alone. But the questions felt too intimate, too presumptuous. Instead, she focused on her plate, pushing beans around with her fork. "Your father's place?" Rowan asked quietly. Clara's throat tightened. "Was. Now it's mine. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but something in his tone, a recognition, maybe, of what loss actually meant, made them land differently than the hollow condolences she'd heard in town. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "How long you been working it alone?" 6 months? The admission felt like weakness, but she continued anyway. "He had a heart attack, went quick." "That's a lot of ranch for one person." "I manage." Defensive, automatic. Rowan didn't argue. He just finished his meal and carried his plate to the basin by the window, setting it down gently. "Thank you for supper, Miss Whitfield. I'll get started on those fences come morning, if you're willing." "I told you one night." "Yes, ma'am. But fences don't fix themselves, and that north line's about ready to fall. Won't take more than a day or 2. Clara stood, crossing her arms. "Why would you do that?" "Because it needs doing." He met her eyes steadily. "And because I offered work for food. Seems fair to give you your money's worth." There was no charm in his words, no attempt to manipulate or cajole, just a straightforward assessment of the situation and a willingness to follow through. Clara found herself nodding before she'd fully decided. 2 days, then. After that, you move on." "After that, I move on," Rowan agreed. He settled his hat back on his head and stepped out into the deepening twilight. Clara watched through the window as he crossed the yard to the barn, his silhouette dark against the last light bleeding from the sky. She stood there long after he'd disappeared inside, her hands gripping the edge of the basin, wondering what she'd just agreed to, and why some small, stubborn part of her was glad she had. Dawn came cold and pink across the desert. Clara woke to the sound of hammering and sat bolt upright in bed, her heart racing until she remembered. Rowan. The fences. 2 days. She dressed quickly and went outside, finding him already at work on the north fence line. He'd gathered tools from the barn, wire cutters, a hammer, a box of nails she'd forgotten she had, and was methodically replacing rotted posts with new wood he must have cut from the stand of cottonwoods by the creek. Clara stood watching him, coffee cup warming her hands, as the sun climbed higher. He worked with focused efficiency, no wasted motion, pausing occasionally to wipe sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. When he noticed her, he lifted a hand in acknowledgement but didn't stop working. She went about her own chores, feeding animals, collecting eggs, hauling water, but found her path taking her past the fence line more often than necessary. Each time she saw progress. Posts straightened, wire tightened, gaps closed. By midday, the section that had been sagging dangerously now stood firm and true. Clara brought him water and a piece of cornbread. "You don't have to do that," Rowan said, but he accepted both gratefully. "Can't have you collapsing on my property. People would talk." That almost smile touched his mouth again. "People talk anyway." "That's true enough." Clara hesitated, then asked, "You learned this somewhere? The fence work?" "Worked ranches when I was younger, Colorado mostly. New Mexico for a while." He took a long drink of water. "Learned to make myself useful." "Apache ranches?" "Some. White ranches, too. Whoever would hire me." No bitterness in his voice, just fact. Clara nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken truth, that he'd learned to navigate a world that didn't always want him in it, that being useful was sometimes the only way to earn a place. She knew something about that herself these days. "The barn roof needs work too," she found herself saying. "If you're still here tomorrow." Rowan looked up at the barn, assessing. "I could take a look." 2 days, Clara reminded him, as much for herself as for him. "That's what we agreed." 2 days, he confirmed. But when she walked back to the house, she couldn't quite name the feeling in her chest, relief that help had arrived or anxiety about what it might cost when it left again. The afternoon heat drove them both to the shade of the porch. Clara brought out cold beans and the last of the cornbread, and they ate in companionable silence, watching heat shimmer across the desert scrub. "You grow up here?" Rowan asked, his voice quiet enough not to break the stillness. "Not here exactly. My father homesteaded this place 15 years ago. I was 12. Clara leaned back against the post, her eyes distant. "My mother died the first winter. Fever. After that, it was just the two of us." "That's young to lose a mother." "Felt young to lose a father, too." She glanced at him. "What about you? You have family?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, and Clara thought maybe she'd pushed too far. But then he spoke, his voice measured and careful. "Had a mother. Father I never knew. He was cavalry, stationed at the fort. Left before I was born." He paused. "My mother passed when I was 16. After that, I moved around." "I'm sorry." He nodded acknowledgement. They sat in silence again, but it felt different now, less like the wariness of strangers, and more like the understanding of two people who'd both learned to carry loss quietly. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and lonesome. Clara watched it soar, envying its freedom even as she felt the weight of the land beneath her, this stubborn, demanding piece of earth that she couldn't abandon even if she wanted to. "Why stay?" Rowan asked, as if reading her thoughts. "If it's this hard alone?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Where else would I go?" "Anywhere. Town, maybe. Find work. Find a—" He stopped himself. "A husband?" Clara's laugh was sharp. "The men in town either want my land or think I should sell it and move somewhere appropriate for a woman alone. Neither option appeals." "So you'd rather break your back trying to hold on to a dying ranch?" The words should have stung, but they were delivered without judgment, just honest curiosity. Clara turned to face him fully. This land is all I have left of my parents. My mother's buried on that hill. My father next to her. Every fence post, every stone in that fireplace, every mark on these walls, they built this. Her voice roughened. I don't care if it's dying. I don't care if it's too much for one person. It's mine, and I'm not letting it go just because it's hard. Rowan held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. You think I'm foolish. No, ma'am. I think you're stubborn. But I've known worse traits. Despite herself, Clara felt her mouth curve slightly. My father said the same thing, called it my best and worst quality. Sounds like he knew you well. They fell quiet again, but the silence felt warmer now, less guarded. When Rowan stood to return to work, Clara found herself watching him go with something almost like gratitude. That evening, after supper, Clara stepped out onto the porch with her father's old ledger and a stub of pencil. The numbers hadn't improved since the last time she'd checked them. Expenses mounting, income dwindling, the gap between them widening like a canyon she couldn't cross. She was so absorbed in the grim arithmetic that she didn't notice Rowan approach until he spoke. Sorry to disturb, just wanted to let you know the north fence is finished. Clara looked up, surprised. Already? Yes, ma'am. Should hold through the next few seasons, at least. She set the ledger aside and stood, walking to the porch rail. In the fading light, she could just make out the fence line, straight and solid, where it had been sagging and broken that morning. Something tight in her chest loosened slightly. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Rowan nodded. I'll start on the barn roof tomorrow. Got most of what I need, but I'll need to buy some tar paper in town if you've got funds for it. Clara's stomach nodded. Town meant questions, stares, whispers about the Apache man working her ranch. She could already hear Mabel Carson's scandalized voice, see the knowing looks from the men outside the general store. I can go, she said quickly. You don't need to. Might be easier if I go, Rowan said quietly. People already talk about you. No need to give them more ammunition. The fact that he understood, that he'd already calculated the social cost of his presence, shouldn't have surprised her, but it did. And it made her angry, though not at him. Let them talk, Clara said firmly. I'll go to town tomorrow. You work on the roof. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Respect, maybe, or simply acknowledgement. Yes, ma'am. He turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped him. Rowan? Ma'am? Why are you really doing this? The fence, the barn, you could have moved on this morning, kept traveling west. He was quiet for a moment, his profile dark against the last light. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I've been moving for a long time. Sometimes it's good to stop. Remember what it feels like to finish something. He glanced back at her. And you needed help. Seemed simple enough. Nothing simple. No, he agreed. But some things are straightforward. You needed work done. I know how to do work. Seems like a fair trade. Clara watched him walk back to the barn, his words settling into her like stones into still water. Fair trade. Simple exchange. Nothing more complicated than that, except it already felt more complicated, and they both knew it. But morning came with Clara's resolve set like iron. She hitched her father's old mare to the buckboard, ignoring Rowan's offer to do it for her, and set out for town with a list of supplies and what little money she had tucked in her pocket. Cooper's Creek wasn't much. A main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. Clara drove straight to Miller's general store, her chin high despite the stares that followed her progress down the street. Inside, Walter Miller looked up from his counter with surprise. Clara, wasn't expecting to see you today. Need some supplies, Mr. Miller? She set her list on the counter. He scanned it, his eyebrows rising. Tar paper? You doing repairs? Barn roof? That's heavy work for a woman alone. Clara's smile was tight. Good thing I'm not alone then. The words hung in the air. Walter's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something harder to name. You hired someone? He's helping with repairs, temporarily. He? Walter's voice dropped. Clara, you can't just bring strange men onto your property. It's not safe, and it's not proper. What's proper is keeping my roof from leaking, Clara said evenly. Can you fill the order or not? Walter hesitated, then began gathering items from the shelves. People are worried about you, Clara. You're out there alone, vulnerable. If something happened, I can take care of myself. Can you? He set a bag of nails on the counter with more force than necessary. Or are you just too proud to admit you need help from the right kind of people? Clara's hands curled into fists. The right kind of people haven't exactly been lining up to offer. Because you won't let them. Tom Henderson asked if you needed anything just last month and you nearly bit his head off. Tom Henderson wanted to buy my land for half what it's worth. He wanted to help. He wanted to help himself. Clara's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. I'm not selling, Mr. Miller. Not to Tom, not to anyone. And if I need to hire help to keep the place running, that's my business. Walter's jaw tightened. Is he Indian? The question landed like a slap. Clara met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. His name is Rowan Greyhawk. He's doing honest work for honest pay. That's all you need to know. Clara. The supplies, Mr. Miller, please. He finished gathering the items in stiff silence, tallying the cost with sharp pencil scratches. Clara counted out the money carefully, aware of how little remained in her pocket. As she loaded the buckboard, she felt eyes on her from every direction. The women emerging from the dry goods store, the men lounging outside the saloon, even Reverend Morrison pausing on the church steps. Their judgment pressed against her like the desert heat, inescapable and suffocating. Clara climbed onto the buckboard, gathered the reins, and drove out of town with her spine straight and her eyes forward. But her hands shook all the way home. She found Rowan on the barn roof, shirtless in the heat, prying up damaged shingles. He looked down when he heard the buckboard, then climbed down with easy grace. Any trouble? He asked, reading her face too easily. Nothing I couldn't handle. Clara began unloading supplies, her movements jerky with residual anger. Rowan lifted the heavy roll of tar paper like it weighed nothing. People talk? People always talk. About me? Clara stopped, meeting his eyes. Yes? He nodded slowly, unsurprised. You want me to move on? Save you the trouble? The question was asked without self-pity, just practical assessment. Clara realized with sudden clarity that he'd been expecting this, that he'd probably faced this choice 100 times before, in 100 different places. Stay and cause problems, or leave and make it easier for everyone. No, she said firmly. I want you to fix my damn roof. Something flickered in Rowan's dark eyes. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude. Yes, ma'am. He carried the supplies to the barn, and Clara stood in the yard, her heart still hammering from town, from Walter Miller's judgment, from the weight of her own defiance. She'd just drawn a line in the dust, claimed Rowan's presence as her choice, her right. There was no taking it back now, second. The work continued, days blurred into each other. Hot mornings, brutal afternoons, evenings that cooled just enough to make breathing easier. Rowan fixed the barn roof, reinforced the chicken coop, repaired the irrigation ditch that fed her struggling garden. Clara worked beside him when she could, learning the rhythm of his labor, the quiet competence that marked everything he did. They talked more now. Not much. Neither of them were particularly inclined toward chatter, but enough. She learned he'd worked cattle drives, broken horses, built fences across 3 territories. He learned she'd taught herself to read from her mother's Bible, could shoot a rifle better than most men, and had once punched a boy in town for saying her father's homestead would fail. Did it? Rowan asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. The homestead or the boy? The boy. Clara's lips curved. Broke his nose. He didn't bother me again. Rowan's quiet laugh surprised her, low and genuine, the sound of it warming something inside her chest. They ate supper together on the porch most evenings, watching the sun paint the desert in impossible colors. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat, the silence comfortable in a way Clara hadn't experienced since her father died. One evening, as stars began to prick the darkening sky, Rowan spoke into the quiet. 2 days came and went. Clara's stomach dropped. She'd been trying not to count, not to notice how the temporary arrangement had stretched into something undefined. I know. You want me to leave? She should say yes, should thank him for his help, pay him what she could, and send him west like he'd planned. The safe choice. The proper choice. The corral fence still needs work, Clara heard herself say, and the well pump's getting worse. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. That could take another week. Could take 2. Might? Clara looked at him, his profile etched against the last light, his hands rough and capable, his presence steady as stone. Something had shifted between them, subtle as seasons changing, and they both felt it. Coffee's on if you want some, she said softly. Appreciated. When he went inside to pour it, Clara stayed on the porch, her heart beating too fast, her mind spinning with questions she didn't have answers for. What was she doing? Where would this lead? And why did the thought of Rowan leaving make her chest ache like a fresh bruise? She didn't know. But when he returned with 2 cups and settled beside her on the top step, their shoulders almost touching, Clara decided some questions didn't need answering yet. For now, this was enough. The week stretched into 2, then 3, and neither of them mentioned leaving again. Rowan became a fixture on the ranch, up before dawn, working through the brutal midday heat, his presence as steady as the mountains on the horizon. He fixed the corral fence, replaced leather hinges on the barn door, and rebuilt the stone foundation of the chicken coop where winter rains had washed it away. The well pump took longer. He had to ride into Cooper's Creek for parts, returning with new washers and a length of pipe, his face carefully neutral when Clara asked if anyone had given him trouble. Bought what I needed, was all he said. Paid fair price. Clara didn't press, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw stayed tight for an hour after he returned. She wanted to ask what had been said, who had made him feel unwelcome, but the words stuck in her throat. What could she say that would make any difference? The world was what it was, and neither of them could change it with words alone. Instead, she worked beside him on the well, holding tools when he asked, learning the mechanics of the pump through his patient explanations. His hands were scarred and calloused, but his touch on the machinery was gentle, almost reverent. He had a way of understanding how things worked, not just the physical mechanics, but the deeper logic of structure and stress, weakness and strength. There, he said finally, tightening the last bolt. Try it now. Clara worked the handle. Water flowed clear and strong, no grinding, no hesitation. She looked up to find him watching her with quiet satisfaction. Thank you, she said, inadequate words for what she felt. It's what I'm here for. But they both knew it had become more than that. Sunday morning arrived cool and clear. Clara dressed in her better clothes, a faded blue dress she'd mended so many times the seams had seams, and pinned her hair up with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. She found Rowan by the barn, brushing down his horse with long, methodical strokes. I'm going to church, she said, the words coming out more abrupt than she'd intended. Rowan nodded without looking up. I'll keep working on the garden fence. Clara hesitated. She should leave it there, go to town alone like always, maintain the careful separation between her public life and this private arrangement. But something stubborn rose in her chest, the same defiance that had made her hire him, keep him, defend him to Walter Miller. You could come, she heard herself say. If you wanted. The brush stilled. Rowan straightened slowly, his dark eyes searching her face. You sure about that? No. Honesty seemed important, but I'm asking anyway. A complicated expression crossed his face, something between gratitude and resignation. Appreciate the offer, but I think you know how that would go. Clara did know, could picture it perfectly, the scandalized whispers, the pointed stares, Reverend Morrison's strained smile as he tried to maintain Christian charity while his congregation seethed. Mabel Carson would probably faint. Tom Henderson would find some excuse to start trouble. Then they're hypocrites, Clara said hotly, standing there singing about love and brotherhood while being human. Rowan's voice was gentle, without bitterness. People are who they are, Clara. Church doesn't change that, just gives them a place to pretend for an hour. He resumed brushing his horse. You go. Sing your hymns. I'll be here when you get back. The certainty in those last words, I'll be here, settled something anxious inside her. Clara nodded and climbed onto the buckboard, but she looked back twice before the ranch disappeared from view, finding him both times standing in the same spot, watching her go. Church was exactly as uncomfortable as she'd expected. The moment Clara walked through the door, conversation stopped. Eyes tracked her progress to her usual pew, the one her father had occupied for 15 years, now hers by right of inheritance and stubbornness. She sat with her spine straight and her hands folded, refusing to acknowledge the whispers that rose like flies around rotting meat. Reverend Morrison preached about charity, about welcoming strangers and showing kindness to those different from ourselves. The irony wasn't lost on Clara, especially when she caught Mabel Carson whispering behind her fan to Judith Henderson, both women shooting pointed looks in her direction. After the service, Clara tried to leave quickly, but Mabel intercepted her on the church steps. "Clara, dear, we've been so worried about you." Mabel's smile was syrup over vinegar. "Living out there all alone, it's just not safe." "I'm managing fine, Mrs. Carson." "But that's just it. You're not alone, are you?" Mabel's eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. "Walter Miller said you've hired someone. A man. An Indian man." Several women had gathered now, forming a semicircle of judgment dressed in Sunday clothes. Clara felt their attention like pressure against her skin. "I've hired help for repairs," Clara said evenly. "That's all." "But Clara, think of your reputation." This from Judith Henderson, Tom's wife, her voice pitched for maximum audience. "A young woman alone with a strange man, and an Apache at that, people will talk." "Let them talk." "You can't mean that." Mabel clutched her Bible like a weapon. "Your poor father would be horrified. To think of you out there, unprotected, with someone who might what?" Clara's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Might fix my fences, repair my barn, help me keep the ranch running, because that's what he's doing, Mrs. Carson. Honest work for honest pay." "But the impropriety," Clara interrupted, her temper finally snapping, "is you standing here gossiping about my private business while pretending to care about my welfare. If you were so concerned, you could have offered help yourself. You could have sent your sons to repair my roof or your husband to fix my fences. But you didn't. Nobody did. So I found someone who would." Silence fell like a stone. Mabel's face flushed scarlet, and Judith looked away, suddenly fascinated by her shoes. Even Reverend Morrison, who'd approached during Clara's speech, seemed at a loss for words. "Clara," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "perhaps we could discuss this in my office." "There's nothing to discuss, Reverend. I came to worship. I've worshipped. Now I'm going home." She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the gasps and whispers, and climbed onto the buckboard with hands that shook only slightly. As she drove away, she could feel their stares burning into her back like brands. Let them look. Let them whisper. She was done apologizing for surviving. Rowan was working in the garden when she returned, his shirt dark with sweat, his hands deep in the earth. He looked up at the sound of the buckboard and immediately set down his tools, reading her face with that uncanny accuracy he had. "Bad?" he asked simply. "About what I expected." Clara climbed down, her legs unsteady from anger and adrenaline. "Mabel Carson thinks I'm ruining my reputation. Judith Henderson thinks I'm insane. The whole congregation thinks I should sell the ranch and find a husband who will protect me from my own poor judgment." Rowan's jaw tightened. "You want me to go?" "No." The word came out fierce, almost violent. "I want them to mind their own damn business, but I'll settle for you staying." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, warmth, something deeper she didn't have a name for. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay." They stood facing each other across the garden plot, the afternoon sun beating down, the desert stretching vast and indifferent around them. In that moment, Clara realized they'd crossed some invisible line. This wasn't temporary anymore. Wasn't just about repairs and meals and fair exchange. This was a choice, a stand, a statement that what they were building here mattered more than what anyone in town thought about it. "I should change," Clara said, her voice rough. "This dress is too nice for work." "Clara." Rowan's voice stopped her. When she looked back, his eyes held hers with quiet intensity. "Thank you for defending me. You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Clara said softly. "I did." The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, one defined less by work and more by companionship. They still labored from dawn to dusk. The ranch demanded nothing less. But the tasks felt different now, shared rather than solitary. Rowan showed Clara how to repair tack properly, how to read the sky for coming weather, how to gentle a skittish horse with patience instead of force. She taught him her mother's recipes, the quirks of the wood stove, which plants in the desert were edible and which would kill you. They talked more. Real conversations that stretched into the evening, carried on the cool night air. Rowan told her about the places he'd been. The high mountains of Colorado, where snow stayed year-round, the painted deserts of New Mexico, where the rocks glowed red at sunset, the plains of Kansas, where you could see for miles in every direction and still feel small. Clara talked about her parents, memories she'd kept locked away since her father's death. Her mother's laugh, bright as bells, her father's hands, always gentle despite their roughness. The way they'd loved this land even when it fought them, even when it took everything they had. "They sound like good people," Rowan said one evening, his voice quiet in the darkness. They were. Clara stared at the stars scattered across the black vault of sky. "I'm not sure I'm good enough to honor what they built. You're still here, still fighting. That honors them." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that stubborn survival counted as legacy. But doubt gnawed at her. The eroding fences, the failing well, the garden that produced half what her mother's had, the cattle sold off one by one until only a handful remained. "What if fighting isn't enough?" she whispered. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if it is?" The first monsoon came without warning, the way they always did. One moment the sky was clear and burning blue. The next, clouds boiled up from the south like smoke, darkening the world to twilight in minutes. Wind hit first, tearing at the loose shingles Rowan hadn't reached yet, sending Clara's chickens squawking for shelter. "Clara!" Rowan's shout cut through the rising storm. "The lower pasture. We need to redirect the wash before it floods." She understood immediately. The seasonal creek that ran along her property line was dry most of the year, but when the rains came hard, it became a torrent that could wash away fences, topple trees, carve new channels through the land. If it jumped its banks near the lower pasture, she'd lose what little grazing land she had left. They ran together through the first fat drops of rain, grabbing shovels from the barn. By the time they reached the creek bed, water was already rising, brown and angry, carrying brush and debris in its rush. "We need to build a berm here," Rowan shouted over the growing roar. "Channel it back toward the main wash." Clara didn't waste breath on questions. She just dug. The rain came harder, turning the world to water and noise. Within minutes, Clara was soaked through, her dress clinging to her skin, mud sucking at her boots. She dug until her shoulders screamed, until her hands blistered and bled, until she couldn't tell rain from sweat. Beside her, Rowan worked with grim determination, throwing up walls of earth and stone, shoring up weak spots, reading the water's intention and countering it with human will. Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough to make Clara's hair stand on end. Thunder followed immediately, a percussion that rattled her bones. "It's not holding," she screamed. "Keep digging!" The water rose higher, testing their makeshift barriers, finding weaknesses, exploiting them. Clara's shovel hit rock, and the impact jarred through her arms. But she kept digging, kept fighting, kept refusing to let the land take one more thing from her. She didn't know how long they worked. Time dissolved into endless repetition of dig, lift, throw, dig again. Her world narrowed to mud and water and the burning in her muscles. Once she slipped and nearly fell into the rushing creek. Rowan's hand shot out, catching her wrist, hauling her back to solid ground with strength that shocked her. "Careful," he shouted, his face inches from hers, rain streaming down his cheeks. "I'm fine." "Like hell you are." But he didn't let go. For a heartbeat they stood frozen, locked together in the storm, and Clara saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Fear, yes, but also something fiercer, more possessive. Something that said he'd fight the flood itself before he'd let it take her. Then the moment broke, and they were digging again, two figures bent against the storm, refusing to yield. Slowly, impossibly, the berm held. The water found the path they'd carved for it, following their design back toward the main wash. The rain continued for another hour, but the immediate danger had passed. When the storm finally moved east, leaving the desert dripping and stunned, Clara and Rowan stood surveying their work in the strange quiet that followed. The lower pasture was muddy, but intact. The fence line held. The land remained hers. Clara started laughing, a wild, breathless sound that bordered on hysteria. She was covered head to toe in mud, bleeding from a dozen scrapes she didn't remember getting, exhausted beyond measure, and she was laughing like a madwoman. Rowan looked at her with concern. "Clara? We did it," she gasped between laughs. "We actually did it." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it. "Yeah, we did." They walked back to the house in the fading light, too tired to speak, their boots squelching in the mud. At the porch, Clara stopped, suddenly aware of what a mess she was. "I should wash outside. Don't want to track mud through the house." "There's a bucket by the pump." They stripped to their underclothes without self-consciousness, too exhausted for modesty. Clara pumped water while Rowan scrubbed mud from his arms and chest. Then they traded places. The water was cold enough to make her gasp, but it felt glorious against her overheated skin. When they were reasonably clean, they went inside. Clara found dry clothes for both of them, a pair of her father's old trousers and a shirt for Rowan, a simple cotton dress for herself. They changed in separate rooms, moving slowly, their bodies reminding them of the price they'd paid. "Hungry?" Clara asked when they reconvened in the kitchen. "Starving." She made coffee and heated beans, her movements automatic despite her exhaustion. They ate standing up, too tired to sit, leaning against opposite counters in comfortable silence. "That was close," Rowan said finally. Too close. But you didn't give up." Clara looked at him, really looked. His dark hair was still damp, falling across his forehead. His eyes held that steady warmth she'd come to recognize, to depend on. He was still here, still standing, still choosing to stay despite everything. "Neither did you," she said softly. "No." His voice dropped, became something different. "I didn't." The air between them shifted, charged with something that had been building for weeks. Clara's heart began to hammer, but not from fear, from possibility. From the sudden terrifying awareness that they were alone in her kitchen, half-dressed, soaked and muddy from fighting the land together, and she wanted Clara. Her name on his lips was a question. She didn't have an answer, didn't have words for what she felt. This mix of gratitude and attraction, companionship and desire, safety and danger, all tangled together into something she'd never experienced before. So instead of speaking, she closed the distance between them. Rowan went very still as she approached, his eyes searching hers, looking for permission or warning. Clara raised one hand and laid it against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and fast beneath her palm. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered. "Neither do I." "But I want—" She stopped, frustrated by her own inarticulation. "I don't want you to go. I'm not going anywhere." His hand came up to cover hers. "Not unless you tell me to." They stood like that for a long moment, connected by that single point of contact, both of them trembling slightly. Then Clara stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should sleep," she said, her voice unsteady. "It's been a long day." "Yeah," Rowan's voice was rough. "It has." He moved toward the door, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Rowan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for today, for the pasture, for everything." He turned, backlit by the lamp, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to thank me, Clara. We're partners now. That's what partners do." Partners. The word settled into her chest like a warm coal, glowing. "Good night," she said. "Good night." After he left, Clara stood alone in the kitchen for a long time, her hand pressed to the place where his had been, feeling the echo of his heartbeat like it was still happening, still real. Something had changed tonight, something fundamental and irrevocable. She just wasn't sure yet what it meant. The days following the storm brought a softness to the desert Clara had almost forgotten existed. Green things pushed up through the mud, wildflowers in impossible colors, grass where before there'd been only dust, cacti blooming with delicate flowers that seemed too fragile for their thorny hosts. The land remembered how to be generous, if only briefly. Clara and Rowan worked in this transformed landscape, their movements coordinated now. Speaking in shorthand developed through weeks of shared labor. She'd hand him tools before he asked. He'd anticipate what needed doing before she mentioned it. They'd become a unit, two parts of a functioning whole. But underneath the easy companionship ran a current of tension. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but present. Aware. Clara found herself noticing things she'd tried to ignore before. The way Rowan's shoulders moved beneath his shirt. The sound of his quiet laugh. The rare moments when he smiled fully and it transformed his entire face. She caught him watching her too, his gaze following her movements with an intensity that made her skin warm. Neither of them spoke about it. Neither of them acknowledged the night in the kitchen, the almost moment that had crackled between them. But it was there, constant as the desert sun. One afternoon, while repairing a section of corral fence, Clara's hammer slipped and came down hard on her thumb. She yelped, dropping the tool, and Rowan was beside her immediately. "Let me see." "It's fine. Clara, let me see." She held out her hand, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped when his fingers closed gently around her wrist. The thumb was already swelling, turning an ugly purple. "Might be broken," Rowan said, his voice concerned. "It's not broken, just bruised." He looked up at her, one eyebrow raised. "You a doctor now?" "I've hit myself before. I know the difference." "Stubborn woman. You're just figuring that out?" His lips quirked. Still holding her hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a bandana, wrapping it carefully around the injured thumb with surprising gentleness. His head was bent, focused on the task, and Clara found herself staring at the crown of his head, the way the sun caught blue-black highlights in his hair. "There," he said, tying off the bandage. "Should help with the swelling." But he didn't let go. His thumb traced a slow circle on her wrist, right over her pulse point, and Clara knew he could feel it racing. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to narrow to just this, his hand on hers, the weight of everything unspoken between them. "Clara," he said quietly, "if I'm making you uncomfortable, you're not. If you want me to keep my distance, I don't." The words came out too fast, too honest. "I don't want that at all." Rowan's expression shifted, something fierce and hungry flickering across his features before he controlled it. "Then what do you want?" Clara didn't know how to answer. How could she explain that she wanted everything and nothing, wanted him to stay and was terrified of what it meant, wanted his touch, and didn't know the first thing about how to ask for it? "I want," she started, then stopped, tried again. "I've never—" She couldn't finish. Heat flooded her face, embarrassment choking the words. Understanding dawned in Rowan's eyes. His expression softened, the hunger banking to something gentler but no less intense. "It's okay. We don't have to rush anything." "I'm 26 years old," Clara said, frustration making her blunt. "I've been kissed exactly once by Tommy Fletcher when I was 15, and I punched him in the mouth for his trouble. I don't know what—" "Hey," Rowan's free hand came up to cup her cheek, stopping her spiraling words. "There's no script for this. No right way or wrong way. We figure it out together. But you've probably— Doesn't matter what I have or haven't done." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, a touch so gentle it made her eyes sting. "What matters is you. What you want. What you're comfortable with." Clara leaned into his palm, letting herself have this small contact, this tiny piece of comfort. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of me? Of this. Of what it means. Of what happens if—" She couldn't voice the fear. "What happens if you leave?" But he heard it anyway. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to." "Promise?" The word came out small, vulnerable, everything she'd spent years training herself not to be. But Rowan didn't mock or dismiss. He just held her gaze steadily. "I promise." They stood like that, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air until Clara's racing heart finally slowed. When they separated, returning to work, nothing had been resolved, but something had been acknowledged, given space to exist. And for now, that was enough. Sunday came around again, and this time Clara didn't go to church. She told herself it was because of her injured thumb, but they both knew it was really about defiance, about refusing to subject herself to more judgment and gossip, about choosing her own company over the town's. Instead, she and Rowan spent the morning in companionable quiet, working in the garden. The storm had been good for the plants. Everything was growing with renewed vigor. Clara knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds with her good hand, while Rowan reinforced the fence against rabbits. "Tell me about your mother," she said suddenly. Rowan paused in his work, considering. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything." Clara sat back on her heels. "You know all about mine. Seems fair." He was quiet for a moment, his hands still. Then, "Her name was Ayana, means eternal blossom in Apache." A small smile touched his lips. She lived up to it. Always had flowers around, wild ones she'd gather, or things she'd convince to grow in pots. Had a gift for making things bloom. Sounds lovely. She was. His voice went distant with memory. Strong, too. Had to be, living the way we did. She worked at the fort sometimes, taking in laundry, mending uniforms. White soldiers would proposition her, thinking she was easy because of what she was. She'd tell them to go to hell in perfect English. Pride colored his tone. She made sure I learned to read, to write, to speak properly. Said I'd need those tools to navigate their world. She was right. Usually was. Rowan resumed his hammering. She got sick when I was 16. Lung fever. Fort doctor wouldn't see her. Said he didn't treat Indians. By the time I found someone who would, it was too late. Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." Long time ago now. But she could hear the old grief in his voice, recognized it because she carried the same weight. Loss didn't diminish with time, just became something you learned to carry differently. "What did you do after?" "Drifted." He shrugged. "Worked whatever jobs I could find. Learned early that being useful kept you alive, kept you moving. Spent some time with Apache bands in the mountains, but I didn't quite fit there either. Half-breed, not white enough for the whites, not Apache enough for the Apache." No bitterness in his voice, just statement of fact. "So I kept traveling. Figured maybe there was a place somewhere I'd belong." "Have you found it?" Clara asked quietly. Rowan looked up, his dark eyes finding hers across the garden. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. "Maybe," he said finally. "Maybe I have." Clara's breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, needed to hear him say it clearly. But before she could find the words, a voice called out from the front of the house. "Hello, Miss Whitfield?" They both froze. Clara recognized that voice, Reverend Morrison. She stood quickly, brushing dirt from her skirt, and walked around to the front yard. The Reverend sat on a horse, looking uncomfortable and out of place. When he saw her, relief crossed his face. "Miss Whitfield, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Reverend. What brings you out here?" Morrison dismounted, his eyes sliding past her to where Rowan had appeared at the corner of the house. The Reverend's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. "I wanted to check on you. After last Sunday, I was concerned. As you can see, I'm fine." "Yes, I can see that." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Clara, I need to speak with you, privately, if possible." Clara's spine stiffened. "Anything you need to say can be said in front of Mr. Greyhawk." Morrison's jaw worked. "Very well. The congregation is concerned about your living situation. A young woman alone with—" He gestured vaguely toward Rowan. "It's not appropriate. Mr. Greyhawk works for me, that's all." "Is it?" Morrison's voice gentled, but his words still stung. "Clara, I'm not here to judge. I'm here as your pastor, as someone who cares about your spiritual welfare. What you're doing, the appearance of it, it's damaging your reputation. People talk, they wonder, and some are beginning to question whether you're fit to hold this property." Cold dread settled in Clara's stomach. "What do you mean?" "Tom Henderson has been speaking with a lawyer. He thinks he can make a case that you're not managing the ranch properly, that it's being misused, that perhaps it would be better in more capable hands." "More capable hands," Clara repeated, her voice dangerous. "You mean his hands?" "I mean someone who could work it properly without causing scandal." Anger flared hot in Clara's chest. "This is my land. My father left it to me. Tom Henderson has no claim. He might, Morrison interrupted. If he can prove you're not fit to hold it, and having an unmarried man living here, he doesn't live here, he works here. The distinction may not matter in court. Silence fell, thick and poisonous. Clara felt Rowan's presence behind her, solid and steady, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him, couldn't face what she might see in his eyes. Is that all, Reverend? Her voice came out flat, dead. Morrison sighed. Clara, I'm trying to help. If you would just consider there are other options. Sell the land, move to town, find respectable work. Maybe in time find a husband who could get off my property. Clara, now, Reverend, before I forget my manners. Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Clara's face stopped him. He mounted his horse stiffly, his expression troubled. I'll pray for you, he said. Don't bother. She stood rigid as he rode away, her hands clenched into fists, her whole body trembling with rage and fear. Only when he disappeared over the rise did she allow herself to move. Clara, Rowan's voice, quiet behind her. Don't. We need to talk about... I said don't! She whirled on him and was immediately ashamed of the way he stepped back, hands raised. I'm sorry. I need a minute. She walked away fast, heading for the barn, needing space to breathe, to think, to figure out how to fight this new threat. Tom Henderson. A lawyer. Claims of unfitness. They could take it. Could actually take her land away, and there was nothing... Arms came around her from behind, gentle but firm, and she realized she'd started to cry. Rowan turned her in his embrace, pulling her against his chest, and Clara stopped fighting. She just buried her face in his shirt and let herself break. I can't lose this place, she sobbed. I can't. It's all I have left. I know. They'll take it. They'll find a way to take it, and there's nothing I can do. That's not true. Rowan's hand stroked her hair, slow and soothing. We'll figure something out. We? Clara pulled back to look at him, her vision blurred with tears. Rowan, you heard him. You being here is making it worse. If you leave, I'm not leaving. But yeah, I'm not leaving, he repeated, his voice hard with certainty. We'll find another way, a better way. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to think there was a solution that didn't involve losing either her land or the man who'd become essential to her existence, but she couldn't see it, couldn't imagine how. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, me too. That admission, that he was scared too, somehow made it better, made her feel less alone in her fear. Clara leaned into him again, letting his arms anchor her, and tried to believe that together they could weather this storm too, even if she couldn't yet see how. They spent the rest of that day in careful silence, both of them thinking too hard, worrying too much. Clara tried to focus on ordinary tasks, feeding chickens, checking the irrigation, mending a tear in her work dress, but her mind kept circling back to Reverend Morrison's words. Tom Henderson, a lawyer. The very real possibility that she could lose everything. By evening, exhaustion and anxiety had wound her so tight she could barely sit still. She paced the kitchen while Rowan sat at the table, his expression thoughtful, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. There has to be something, Clara muttered, making another circuit of the small room. Some way to prove I'm managing the ranch properly. The fences are repaired, the barn's sound, the well works. It's not really about the ranch, Rowan said quietly. Clara stopped pacing. What? Henderson doesn't care if you're managing properly or not. He wants the land, and he's using your reputation as leverage. Rowan looked up at her, his dark eyes steady. The scandal isn't the cause. It's the weapon. The truth of it settled like lead in Clara's stomach. She sank into the chair across from him, suddenly drained. So what do I do? Send you away to prove I'm respectable? Pretend these past weeks never happened? Would that even work? Probably not. Clara laughed bitterly. The damage is done. Even if you left tomorrow, they'd still talk, still think the worst. Then maybe respectability isn't the answer. What other answer is there? Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the worn wood of the table. When he spoke, His voice was careful, measured. You could marry. The word hung between them like a physical thing. Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. Marry, she repeated, her mouth dry. A respectable husband would protect your claim, give you the legal standing that Henderson can't challenge. Rowan's eyes stayed fixed on the table. There's probably men in town who'd consider it. Walter Miller's got a son, doesn't he? And I heard the blacksmith is widowed. Stop. Clara's voice came out stramper than she intended. Just stop. Rowan looked up, and she saw something raw in his expression before he controlled it. I'm trying to find solutions. Solutions that don't involve you. Clara, no. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You think I could marry some man from town? Someone who'd see this land as his right? Who'd probably try to send me to live with his sister while he ran things properly? Who'd erase my father's memory and my mother's grave and everything I've been fighting for? Better than losing it entirely. Is it? Clara's hands clenched into fists. Is that really what you think I should do? Rowan stood too, his jaw tight. I think you should do whatever it takes to keep this place. That's what you want, isn't it? To hold on to your parents' legacy? Yes, but not like that. Not by... She broke off, frustrated by her own inability to articulate what she felt. Not by what? Rowan's voice dropped, became something different. Not by marrying someone you don't love? The question crackled between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said. Clara's breath came too fast, her pulse thundering in her ears. I can't marry someone I don't love, she said finally, quietly. I can't spend my life with someone who doesn't understand what this place means, who doesn't know how to work beside me instead of over me, who doesn't... She stopped, the words too dangerous to speak. Who doesn't what? Rowan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. Clara shook her head, unable to continue. But Rowan closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her face with that gentle touch that never failed to undo her. Say it, he said softly. Who isn't you? Clara whispered. I can't marry someone who isn't you. The confession hung in the air between them, terrifying and true. Rowan's expression shifted through a dozen emotions too fast to name, landing finally on something fierce and tender at once. Clara. Her name was rough in his throat. You know what people would say? What it would cost you. More or less than it's already costing me? People can be cruel. You'd face worse than gossip. You'd face real hatred. They'd never accept it, never accept us. I don't care. And saying it, Clara realized it was true. Let them hate. Let them talk. I'm tired of living my life according to their rules. You say that now? I say that now, and I'll say it tomorrow and every day after. Claire grabbed his shirt, her fingers twisting in the fabric. I'm not asking for their acceptance, Rowan. I'm just asking for you. His breath caught. For a moment he just stared at her like he was trying to memorize her face, read the truth of her words in her eyes. Then slowly, carefully, he leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. I'm not a good bet, he said quietly. I've got nothing to offer you but work and whatever skills I've picked up drifting. No money, no prospects, no family name worth a damn. I don't want money or prospects. I want a partner. Someone who sees me as equal, not property. Someone who understands what this land means and is willing to fight for it. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Someone who already does all of that. If we do this, there's no going back. You understand that? I understand. Claire's voice steadied with certainty. Do you? Instead of answering with words, Rowan kissed her. It was nothing like Tommy Fletcher's clumsy attempt when she was 15. This was deliberate, careful, a question asked with lips and breath. Clara froze for half a heartbeat, uncertain, then let herself respond. She'd spent so long being strong, being hard, being alone. Letting herself be soft, letting herself want, felt like stepping off a cliff. But Rowan caught her. His hands framed her face, his touch gentle, despite the calluses, and he kissed her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. Clara's hands found his shoulders, holding on, and when they finally broke apart, she was trembling. I've never... she started. I know. Rowan's thumb brushed her cheekbone. We'll take it slow. How slow? A smile tugged at his mouth. As slow as you need. Clara nodded, her heart still racing, her whole body singing with new awareness. We should probably figure out the practical parts first. The practical parts, Rowan repeated, amusement warming his voice. The marriage, how we do it without… She gestured vaguely. Without making things worse. Rowan's expression sobered. We could ride to Tucson, get married there, away from town gossip. And come back married? Come back legal. His jaw set. Henderson wants to claim you're unfit? Hard to argue that when you're a properly married woman managing a ranch with her husband. The word, husband, sent a thrill through Clara that she tried to ignore. There were practical considerations to address first, logistics to work out. But underneath the practicality ran a current of something else, something that felt like hope. When? She asked. Soon as you're ready. Clara thought about it. Thought about riding to Tucson, standing before a justice of the peace, speaking vows that would bind them together legally even if the town never accepted it. Thought about coming home to face the gossip and judgment as a married woman with every right to her land. Thought about Rowan, not as temporary help but as permanent partner, as husband. Tomorrow, she said. We go tomorrow. Rowan's eyes widened slightly. You're sure? Are you? He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm sure. They stood close in the lamplight kitchen, the enormity of what they'd just decided settling over them like snow. Clara felt the weight of it, the risk, but also something lighter, something that might have been joy if she let herself believe in it. I should pack, she said, not moving. Probably should, Rowan agreed, also not moving. They smiled at each other, tentative and uncertain and strangely giddy. Then Clara stepped back, breaking the spell, and went to prepare for a journey that would change everything. They left before dawn, riding double on Rowan's horse with Clara's mare tied behind carrying their few supplies. The desert was still cool, stars fading as the eastern sky began to pale. Clara sat in front of Rowan in the saddle, his arms around her to hold the reins, and tried not to think too hard about what they were doing. Tucson was 2 days' ride south. They'd have to camp one night on the trail, alone together, and Clara felt heat rise in her face at the thought. But Rowan had said they'd take it slow, and she trusted him. Trusted him more than she'd trusted anyone since her father died. The morning stretched quiet and long, broken only by the horse's steady rhythm and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. They stopped at midday to water the horses and eat the bread and dried beef Clara had packed. Rowan spread his bedroll in the shade of a massive saguaro and gestured for her to sit. You doing okay? He asked, settling beside her. Nervous, Clara admitted. But okay. Second thoughts? She considered lying, then decided against it. More like third and fourth thoughts, but not about you, about everything else. The town. Henderson, the legal fight, whether this will even work. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. What if we get married and he still finds a way to take the land? Then we'll fight him in court. Together. Rowan's hand found hers, their fingers linking naturally. But marriage gives you legal protection you don't have now. Makes it harder for him to claim unfitness. Because I'll have a man to manage me? Because you'll have legal partnership, equal standing in the eyes of the law, even if people don't see it that way. He paused. I looked into it, asked some questions last time I was in town. A married woman can own property jointly with her husband, can make decisions, has rights a single woman doesn't. Clara turned to look at him, surprised. You researched this? Wanted to know what we were getting into. His expression was serious. Wanted to make sure I wasn't making things worse for you. Something in Clara's chest expanded, warm and grateful. He'd thought ahead, planned, tried to protect her interests, even when he had nothing to gain from it. This was what partnership looked like. Not grand gestures, but quiet consideration. Practical care. Thank you, she said softly. Rowan squeezed her hand. We're in this together now. Your fights are my fights. They rode on as the afternoon heat built, finding what shade they could, letting the horses set an easy pace. By evening, they'd covered good ground, the land changing subtly as they moved south. More mesquite, different cacti, the mountains taking on new shapes against the sky. They made camp in a wash lined with cottonwoods, the trees offering both shelter and firewood. Rowan tended the horses while Clara gathered kindling, and soon they had a small fire crackling against the gathering dark. They ate in comfortable silence, the day's travel settling into their bones as pleasant exhaustion. "I'll take first watch," Rowan said when they'd finished. "Watch for what? We're miles from anywhere." "Habit." He fed another stick to the fire. "You sleep. I'll wake you if I get tired." But Clara didn't want to sleep yet. She felt restless, aware of Rowan beside her in a way that was both comfortable and charged. They were alone together, truly alone, for the first time since he'd arrived at her ranch. No chores to distract them, no town gossip hovering at the edges. Just the two of them and the desert night. "Tell me something," she said. "Something I don't know about you." Rowan considered, his face thoughtful in the firelight. "I can track anything. Learned from my mother and her people. Can read sign most white men wouldn't even see, broken twigs, disturbed dust, the way grass bends when something passes." "That's useful." "It is. Kept me alive more than once." He glanced at her. "Your turn," Clara thought. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was young, before my mother died. She taught me to read using her Bible and whatever books the traveling preachers would leave behind. I thought maybe I could teach other children someday." "Why didn't you?" "Life," Clara said simply. "After Mother died, there was just the ranch, just survival. Dreams like that seemed foolish." "Not foolish," Rowan said quietly. "Just postponed." She smiled, grateful for his refusal to dismiss her younger self's hopes. They fell quiet again, watching the fire dance, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Crickets, the distant yip of coyotes, wind moving through the cottonwood leaves like water. "Clara," Rowan said eventually, his voice careful. "About tomorrow. The ceremony. I want you to know, I'm not expecting anything, not beyond what you're comfortable giving." Heat flooded Clara's face. "I know." "Do you?" He turned to face her fully. "Because we'll be married in the eyes of the law. But that doesn't mean I won't pressure you, won't expect you to—" He broke off, clearly uncomfortable. Clara appreciated his discretion even as she felt her own embarrassment. They were dancing around the practical realities of marriage, both of them too awkward to speak plainly. "I appreciate that," she said. "But Rowan, I'm not made of glass. I won't break if you touch me. I know you're strong, but there's a difference between strong and ready." She nodded, understanding. He was giving her permission to set the pace, to take things as slowly as she needed. It was exactly the kind of consideration she'd expected from him, and exactly what she needed to hear. "We'll figure it out," she said, echoing his words from before. "Together." "Together," he agreed. They sat up talking until the fire burned down to coals, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. When Clara finally lay down on her bedroll, Rowan settled nearby but not touching, his presence a comfort in the darkness. She fell asleep listening to his quiet breathing, feeling safer than she had in months. They reached Tucson the next afternoon, dusty and tired but determined. The town was bigger than Cooper's Creek, more cosmopolitan, with enough traffic passing through that one more couple wouldn't draw particular attention. Rowan led them to a small church on the outskirts where a tired-looking priest agreed to marry them for $5. The ceremony was perfunctory, almost businesslike. They stood before the altar while Father Rodriguez recited vows in both English and Spanish, his tone suggesting he'd done this 1,000 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. Clara wore her best dress, hastily brushed clean of trail dust. Rowan wore his cleanest shirt and had actually combed his hair back, which made him look younger somehow, more vulnerable. When the priest asked if she took this man as her husband, Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. "I do." Rowan's response was quieter, but no less certain. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Rowan looked at Clara, a question in his eyes. She nodded, and he leaned in to press a chaste kiss to her lips, brief, respectful, nothing like the kiss in her kitchen, but somehow just as significant. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. They were married. Father Rodriguez had them sign the registry, his handwriting creating an official record. Clara Whitfield and Rowan Greyhawk, married on this day, witnessed and sealed. Clara stared at her new name, Clara Greyhawk, and felt the strangeness of it. She was someone different now, legally transformed by spoken words and signed paper. They found a small inn where they could stay the night, planning to head back to the ranch at first light. The innkeeper, a tired woman with kind eyes, showed them to a simple room with a narrow bed and a washstand. "Congratulations," she said, clearly assuming they were newlyweds based on their obvious discomfort. "I'll have supper sent up." When she left, Clara and Rowan stood awkwardly in the small space, both suddenly very aware of the bed dominating the room. Rowan cleared his throat. "I can sleep on the floor. Don't be ridiculous. We're married now. We can share a bed like civilized people." Clara tried for confidence she didn't quite feel. "Clara, I trust you," she said simply, and watched something in his expression soften. They ate the supper the innkeeper brought, simple stew and bread, and prepared for bed with careful modesty, Clara changing behind the screen while Rowan turned his back. When she emerged in her nightdress, he'd already settled on top of the blankets, fully clothed except for his boots. "You don't have to sleep in your clothes," Clara said, climbing into bed. "Thought it might be easier. First night and all." She appreciated his consideration, even as part of her wondered what it would be like if they didn't have to be so careful with each other. If they could just be natural, comfortable, without all this awkward navigation. But they'd only known each other a few weeks. Some things took time. They lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, but aware of each other's presence. Clara listened to Rowan breathe, felt the mattress shift slightly with his movement, and tried to relax. "Clara?" His voice came quiet in the dark. "Yeah?" "Thank you for choosing this, for choosing me." She rolled onto her side to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the dim light. "Thank you for staying, for fighting with me instead of for me." "Always," he said, and she heard the promise in it. Sleep came easier than she'd expected, exhaustion, and the day's emotions pulling her under. Her last conscious thought was of Rowan's steady breathing beside her, the warmth of another body in a bed that had been cold and lonely for too long. They rode back to the ranch the next day, the journey passing in a blur of heat and dust and growing anxiety about what awaited them. Would Henderson have already made his move? Would the town have turned fully against them? Clara's mind spun with possibilities, each worse than the last. But when they crested the final rise and saw her property spread below, the small cabin, the weathered barn, the fences standing straight and strong, relief flooded through her. It was still there. Still hers, still theirs now. They put the horses away and carried their things inside, moving with the easy coordination they'd developed over weeks of shared work. But everything felt different now, charged with new meaning. This wasn't just Clara's cabin anymore. It was their home, their shared space. "I should check the animals," Clara said, suddenly nervous. "Make sure nothing's happened while we were gone." "I'll come with you." They did the evening chores together, feeding chickens and checking the irrigation, speaking little but comfortable in the silence. The ranch had survived their absence just fine. But as they worked, Clara kept catching glimpses of her ring, a simple silver band Rowan had bought in Tucson, nothing fancy but solid and real on her finger. She was married. The reality of it kept hitting her in waves, thrilling and terrifying by turns. When they finally went inside as full dark fell, the cabin felt different somehow. More alive, maybe, or just more occupied than it had been in months. "I'll heat some water," Clara said. "We're both filthy from the trail." They took turns washing with the warm water, the intimacy of it both ordinary and profound. This was what marriage looked like, Clara thought, sharing space and water and the comfortable silence of people who knew each other's rhythms. After, they sat at the table with coffee, both too keyed up to sleep despite their exhaustion. Tomorrow they'd have to face town, face Henderson, face whatever consequences came from their choice. But tonight, they had this quiet moment, this breathing space before the storm. "What do you think he'll do?" Clara asked. "Henderson, when he finds out." "Push harder, probably. Try to find another angle." Rowan's jaw tightened. "But he'll have a harder time now. You're not a woman alone anymore. You're a married woman with a husband working the land alongside you. You think that'll be enough?" "I think it's a start." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. And whatever comes, we face it together. Clara nodded, drawing strength from his certainty, even as fear whispered in the back of her mind. They'd gambled everything on this choice: her reputation, their future, the fragile hope that love and partnership could be enough to hold on to what mattered. Now they'd find out if the gamble would pay off. "We should sleep," Rowan said eventually. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." They prepared for bed, the routine already familiar from the night before, but different now that they were home. This was their bed now, in their house, the beginning of a shared life that stretched forward into an uncertain future. Clara lay in the darkness, feeling Rowan settle beside her, and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She'd done it. Taken the leap, made the choice, bound herself to this man who'd wandered into her life like a dust storm and somehow become essential. "Rowan?" she whispered. "Yeah? I'm glad it's you. I just wanted you to know that." She felt him shift closer, his hand finding hers beneath the blanket. "I'm glad it's you too." They fell asleep like that, hands linked, two people who'd chosen each other against the odds and now had to find a way to make it work. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Morning arrived too soon and too bright. Clara woke to find Rowan already up, moving quietly around the cabin so as not to wake her. She watched him through slitted eyes for a moment, the careful way he moved, the consideration in his silence, then sat up. "Morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. He turned, a slight smile touching his lips. "Morning. Coffee's on." They ate a simple breakfast and discussed their plan. Someone needed to go to town, file the marriage certificate with the county clerk, make their union official in the public record. It would also serve notice to Henderson and anyone else with designs on her land. She wasn't alone anymore, wasn't vulnerable, wasn't an easy target. "I'll go," Rowan said. "We'll go together." Claire's voice was firm. "This is our marriage, our choice. I'm not hiding from it. It's going to be ugly." "I know." She met his eyes steadily. "But I'm done caring what they think." They hitched up the buckboard and rode to town side by side, Clara's spine straight despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. As they rolled down Cooper's Creek's main street, conversation stopped. People stared. Clara kept her eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the whispers that rose in their wake like dust. They went straight to the county clerk's office, a small building tucked behind the general store. Inside, a bespectacled man looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from boredom to shock as he registered who'd walked in. "Miss Whitfield," he said, then corrected himself with visible effort. "Mrs. Greyhawk, I suppose?" "That's right." Clara set the marriage certificate on his desk. "We need this filed in the county records." The clerk, Martin Hayes, she remembered, picked up the paper with trembling fingers, his eyes scanning the document. "This is... You're married? To him? Is there a problem with the paperwork?" Clara's voice could have cut glass. No problem. It's just..." Hayes looked between them, clearly struggling. "People will talk. People always talk." Clara leaned forward slightly. "But this is legal, properly witnessed, and entirely legitimate. You'll file it?" Hayes swallowed hard, then nodded. Yes, of course, it's my job." He pulled out a ledger and began copying the information with shaking hands. "I'll need a filing fee." $2. Rowan placed the coins on the desk without a word. They waited in tense silence while Hayes completed the paperwork, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet office. Finally, he stamped the document and looked up. "It's done. You're officially recorded as married in the county books." "Thank you." Clara picked up their copy of the certificate, folding it carefully. "Good day, Mr. Hayes." They walked out into the bright sunlight, and Clara saw the crowd that had gathered, seemingly the entire town, drawn by news spreading faster than wildfire. At the front stood Tom Henderson, his face purple with rage, and beside him a weaselly-looking man in a city suit who could only be the lawyer. "You think this changes anything?" Henderson called out, his voice carrying down the street. "You think marrying some drifter makes you fit to hold that land?" Clara stopped walking. Rowan's hand found hers, a silent offer of support. and she squeezed his fingers before stepping forward to face Henderson directly. I think, she said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear, that I'm a married woman running a ranch with my husband. I think that makes me as fit as anyone in this town, more fit than someone who'd use legal tricks to steal land from a neighbor. Henderson's face went even darker. That land was promised to me. Your father and I had an understanding. My father left me his land in a legally binding will. Whatever understanding you think you had doesn't change that. Claire's voice stayed steady despite her hammering heart. And now I have a husband working that land with me. Your lawyer there can confirm you've got no grounds to challenge my ownership. The lawyer, looking uncomfortable, whispered something to Henderson. The rancher's expression cycled through anger, frustration, and finally cold calculation. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Yes, Clara said quietly. It is. She turned away, Rowan beside her, and walked back to the buckboard through the shocked crowd. People parted before them, their faces showing everything from scandalized horror to grudging respect. Clara didn't look at any of them. She just climbed up onto the seat, waited for Rowan to join her, and drove out of town with her head high. Only when they were a mile out, the town disappearing behind them, did she start to shake. You did good, Rowan said quietly. I thought I might throw up. You didn't. You stood there and faced him down like a warrior. Pride colored his voice. Your father would have been proud. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. She hoped that was true. Hoped her father would understand the choice she'd made, the man she'd chosen, the way she was fighting to honor his legacy. They rode home in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet now, the tension of the confrontation easing into relief. They'd done it. Faced down Henderson, made their marriage public record, drawn a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, just like they'd promised. The weeks that followed their public declaration settled into a new kind of normal. The town didn't suddenly accept them. Clara hadn't expected that. But the gossip shifted from scandalous speculation to grudging acknowledgement. She was married now, legally bound, and even the most judgmental had to admit there was nothing improper about a woman working her ranch with her husband. Henderson didn't come around again. His lawyer must have confirmed what Clara already knew, that marriage gave her legal protections he couldn't easily challenge. The land was hers, jointly with Rowan now, and that was that. But the social cost remained. When Clara went to town for supplies, conversation stopped when she entered. Women she'd known her whole life suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Children stared with the unfiltered curiosity of the young, until their mothers hushed them and hurried them away. Let me go next time, Rowan said one evening after Clara returned from town tight-lipped and tense. No. Clara set down her packages harder than necessary. I'm not hiding, not from them, not from anyone. It's not hiding, it's just being practical. It's letting them win. She turned to face him, her jaw set. They want me to be ashamed, to slink around like I've done something wrong. But I haven't, we haven't, and I won't give them the satisfaction. Rowan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, then we go together next time. Rowan, if you're going to face them, you don't do it alone. His voice held that quiet certainty she'd come to recognize. We're partners, remember? Your battles are my battles. So they went to town together the following week, Clara and Rowan side by side in the buckboard, presenting a united front to the whispers and stares. Walter Miller served them at the general store with stiff courtesy, his disapproval evident in every clipped word. But he took their money and gave them their goods, because business was business, even when personal feelings ran contrary. As they loaded supplies onto the buckboard, a small voice called out, Mrs. Greyhawk. Clara turned to find Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher, approaching with obvious nervousness. The young woman couldn't have been more than 22, new to Cooper's Creek last fall, and she looked like she might bolt at any second. Miss Mitchell, Clara said carefully, I just wanted to say... Sarah glanced around, then lowered her voice. I think what you're doing is brave, standing up for yourself like this. Not everyone thinks you're wrong. The words landed like a balm on Clara's bruised pride. Thank you. I mean it. Sarah's eyes flicked to Rowan, then back to Clara. Love should matter more than what people think. And you look happy together. Were they happy? Clara hadn't stopped to consider it, too focused on survival and defiance and holding on to what was theirs. But looking at Rowan now, his steady presence, the way he'd positioned himself protectively without being overbearing, she realized Sarah might be right. We're managing, Clara said, which felt like as much honesty as she could offer. Sarah smiled. That's more than most can say. She glanced around again, then added quickly, if you ever want company, I'd be happy to visit. Bring some books, maybe. I know you like to read. The offer caught Clara off guard. She'd resigned herself to social isolation, to being the town scandal. Having someone, anyone, extend friendship felt almost surreal. I'd like that, she managed. Sarah squeezed her hand quickly and hurried away before anyone could notice the exchange. Clara stood watching her go, something tight in her chest loosening just slightly. See, Rowan said quietly. Not everyone's against us. No, Clara agreed, just most of them. But it was something, a small crack in the wall of judgment, a single voice of support in the chorus of disapproval. Clara held on to it like a candle in the dark as they drove home. Spring deepened into early summer. The ranch demanded constant work, but Rowan's presence transformed what had been overwhelming into merely challenging. They fell into complementary rhythms, Clara handling the animals and garden while Rowan managed the heavier repairs and building projects. But they helped each other constantly, Clara holding boards while Rowan hammered, Rowan weeding while Clara harvested. The physical intimacy of marriage came slowly, carefully. They still shared the narrow bed, but weeks passed before anything more than chaste kisses happened. Rowan kept his word about not pushing, and Clara appreciated his patience even as part of her grew frustrated with her own hesitation. One warm evening, after a particularly long day of work, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Clara leaned against Rowan's shoulder, comfortable with the casual touch in a way she never had been before. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. Do you ever regret it? Staying here, marrying me, giving up your plan to travel west?" Rowan was quiet for a moment, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I thought about it," he admitted, "that first week especially. Wondered what I was getting myself into. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "This is home, Clara. You're home. That's worth more than whatever I might have found out west." The words settled warm in Clara's chest. She turned in his embrace to look up at him, finding his dark eyes already on her, steady and sure. "I need to tell you something," she said, her heart hammering. "Okay. I think I'm ready. For more. For us to be—" She stumbled over the words, heat flooding her face. "I want this marriage to be real, in every way." Rowan's expression softened with understanding. "It's already real." "You know what I mean." "I do." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "But Clara, there's no rush, no timeline we have to follow." "I know, but I want to. I don't know what to do." The admission came out small, embarrassed. "Then we'll figure it out together, like everything else." Rowan leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "We don't have to do anything tonight. We can just be together. See where it goes." Relief and anticipation warred in Clara's chest. "Okay." They went inside as twilight deepened, the cabin warm from the day's heat. Rowan lit a single lamp while Clara drew the curtains, her hands trembling slightly. When she turned back, he was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Come here," he said softly. Clara crossed to him, her heart racing. Rowan pulled her close, his hands settling at her waist, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her ache. This wasn't like their quick kisses on the porch or the chaste goodnight pecks before sleep. This was deliberate, exploratory, a conversation held in touch and breath. Clara's hands found his shoulders, then slid up to tangle in his hair. Rowan made a low sound of approval and deepened the kiss, one hand moving to the small of her back, pressing her closer. Heat bloomed through Clara's body, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan searched her face. "Still okay?" "Yes," Clara managed. "Very okay." He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his features, and led her toward the bed. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, Clara's awkwardness giving way to curiosity as Rowan showed her with patience and gentleness what marriage could mean. Later, lying tangled together in the darkness, Clara felt transformed. Not just by the physical intimacy, though that had been revelatory, but by the emotional vulnerability it required, the trust it demanded. She'd given herself to Rowan completely, and he'd treated that gift with reverence. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. Rowan's arm tightened around her. "For what?" "For being patient. For making me feel," she struggled to articulate it, "safe, even when I'm most vulnerable." "Always," he promised, and Clara believed him. The next morning brought a visitor. Clara was in the garden when she heard a horse approaching and looked up to see Sarah Mitchell riding toward the house. The schoolteacher wore a simple riding dress and carried a canvas bag that looked full of books. "I hope I'm not intruding," Sarah called out as she dismounted. "Not at all." Clara set down her weeding and wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm glad you came." Rowan appeared from the barn, tools in hand, and nodded politely to Sarah before returning to his work. Sarah watched him go with undisguised curiosity. "He seems nice," she said. "He is." Clara led Sarah up to the porch, gesturing to the chairs. "Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely." They settled with cups of strong coffee and Sarah's borrowed books spread between them. The young teacher had brought novels, poetry, even a natural history of Arizona that Clara immediately wanted to devour. They talked about books and teaching, about Sarah's experiences trying to educate children whose parents viewed learning as secondary to ranch work. "I think you'd make a wonderful teacher," Sarah said at one point. "Have you ever considered it?" Clara laughed. "I barely finished my own education. My mother taught me to read, but after she died, formal learning wasn't exactly a priority." "But you love books, you ask smart questions, and you understand what it means to fight for something against the odds." Sarah leaned forward earnestly. "The school board is looking for someone to help with the younger children. It doesn't pay much, but, Sarah, I appreciate the thought, but I don't think the town wants me teaching their children. Some of them might not, but I have final say over my assistants, and I think you'd be perfect." Sarah's eyes sparkled with determination. "Besides, can you imagine Tom Henderson's face if you showed up to help educate Cooper's Creek's youth?" The image was appealing enough to make Clara smile. "Let me think about it." They talked until the afternoon heat drove Sarah to head home, promising to return the following week. After she left, Clara found herself considering the offer more seriously than she'd expected. Teaching had been a childhood dream, long abandoned. Could she actually reclaim it? Would the parents even allow it? "What are you thinking about?" Rowan asked that evening, catching her staring into space instead of eating. Clara told him about Sarah's offer. "It's probably impossible. The town would never accept it." "Maybe not." Rowan set down his fork. "Or maybe some of them would. Sarah's not the only one who thinks you got a raw deal. People gossip, but they also notice things, like how you faced down Henderson, like how you're still here, still working, still refusing to be pushed out." "You think I should do it?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "The ranch isn't going anywhere. I can handle things here a few mornings a week, if you want to teach." The idea took root, growing from impossible to merely improbable to actually feasible. Clara found herself imagining it, standing in front of a classroom, sharing her love of books, and learning, giving children the kind of education her mother had given her. "I'll talk to Sarah," she decided. "See what it would actually involve." Rowan squeezed her hand, pride evident in his expression. "That's my girl." 2 weeks later, Clara stood nervously outside the schoolhouse, watching children file in for the day. Sarah had arranged everything with surprising efficiency, informing the school board that she was hiring an assistant and daring them to object. Some parents had pulled their children out in protest, but most had grudgingly accepted it. Educated children were more valuable than social statements, after all. "Ready?" Sarah asked, appearing at Clara's elbow. Terrified. "Good. That means you care." Sarah smiled encouragingly. "Come on, the little ones are waiting." Clara spent that first morning working with the youngest students, children aged 5 to 7, who were just learning their letters. She read them stories, helped them trace their names, and answered their blunt questions about why some people in town didn't like her. "Is it because you married an Indian?" one little girl asked with the brutal honesty of the young. "Some people think that's wrong," Clara said carefully. "But I think what matters is that we love each other and treat each other with respect." "My papa says love is more important than what people look like," the girl announced. "Your papa sounds like a wise man." By the end of that first week, Clara was exhausted but exhilarated. The children didn't care about scandal or propriety. They just wanted stories and attention and someone to help them puzzle out difficult words. It was exactly the kind of work that fed her soul. Rowan noticed the change in her immediately. "You're glowing," he said one evening. "I'm filthy and exhausted." "Glowing," he insisted, pulling her into his arms. "Happy looks good on you." Clara laughed and kissed him, grateful beyond words for his support. The ranch and the teaching balanced each other perfectly, physical labor grounding her, intellectual engagement feeding her mind. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was building something new rather than just desperately holding on to the past. But peace, as always, was temporary. One afternoon in late summer, Clara returned from teaching to find Rowan waiting on the porch with a grim expression. A folded paper sat on the table between them. "What is it?" she asked, dread already forming in her stomach. "Notice from Henderson's lawyer, he's challenging the validity of our marriage." Clara snatched up the paper, her eyes scanning the legal language. Henderson was claiming their marriage was fraudulent, entered into solely to prevent legal action against Clara's ownership. He was demanding the court review the marriage certificate and potentially void it on grounds of improper intent. "Can he do this?" Clara's voice came out strangled. "His lawyer thinks he can try." Rowan's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. "Doesn't mean he'll win. But if he does, if the court voids our marriage, then we'd be back where we started, and he'd have grounds to challenge your ownership again." Clara sank into a chair, the paper crumpling in her fist. Just when things had started to feel stable, Henderson had found a new angle of attack. Of course he had. Men like him didn't give up just because they'd been thwarted once. "We need a lawyer," she said. "Already thought of that. There's a man in Tucson, Samuel Cortez, handles land disputes and marriage law. Sarah mentioned him. Apparently he helped her family with something a few years back." "Can we afford him?" Rowan's expression went carefully neutral. "We'll figure it out." Which meant they probably couldn't, but he wasn't about to let that stop them. Clara felt a surge of love for this man who'd entered her life as a stranger and become her strongest defender. "When do we need to respond?" "Court date is set for 3 weeks from now. We need to be in Tucson with representation and evidence that our marriage is legitimate." "Evidence?" Clara repeated. "Like what?" "Testimony from people who know us. Documentation of shared property and finances. Proof that we're actually living as husband and wife, not just playing parts." Rowan paused, his expression softening. "And maybe some of that glow you've been carrying lately. Show the judge this is real." Clara managed a weak smile. "Think they accept the way my husband looks at me as legal evidence?" "Couldn't hurt." They spent the evening planning, making lists of what they'd need, who they could ask to testify, how they'd document their shared life. It was frightening how fragile their happiness suddenly felt, how easily it could be dismantled by legal maneuvering and malicious intent. But as they worked, Clara felt her fear giving way to determination. Henderson wanted to void her marriage? Fine. She'd prove to any judge who'd listen that what she and Rowan had built was real, legitimate, and worth protecting. Let him try to take this from her. She'd fight him every step of the way. But the weeks before the court date passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Samuel Cortez turned out to be a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who listened to their story with careful attention and asked pointed questions about their relationship. "The judge will want to know this wasn't a marriage of convenience," he explained, "that you entered into it with genuine intent to build a life together." "We did," Clara said firmly. "Then we'll need to demonstrate that. Witnesses who can speak to your relationship. evidence of cohabitation and shared finances. Anything that shows this is a real marriage, not a legal strategy. Sarah agreed to testify, as did the innkeeper from Tucson who'd seen them on their wedding night. Even Martin Hayes, the county clerk, grudgingly admitted he'd filed legitimate paperwork properly witnessed and executed. It wasn't much, but it was something. The night before they had to leave for Tucson, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to Rowan's steady breathing, and tried not to imagine what would happen if they lost. Would the judge void their marriage? Strip away the legal protections that had let her keep the ranch? Can't sleep? Rowan's voice came quiet in the dark. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. He rolled to face her, his hand finding hers beneath the blankets. What are you thinking? That I can't lose this. Can't lose you. Can't lose the ranch. Can't lose everything I've been fighting for. You won't. You don't know that. No, Rowan admitted. But I know you. Know how strong you are. How stubborn. And I know that whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That has to count for something. Clara moved closer, pressing her face against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him. I love you, she whispered, the words surprising her even as she said them. She'd never spoken them aloud before, had barely let herself think them. Rowan went very still. Then his arms tightened around her and his voice came rough with emotion. I love you too. Have since the storm, I think. Maybe before. They held each other in the darkness, finding comfort in proximity and shared fear. Tomorrow they'd face a judge and a legal system that didn't particularly care about their happiness. But tonight they had this, the warmth of another body, the steady rhythm of shared breathing, the quiet certainty of love spoken and received. It would have to be enough. The courthouse in Tucson was an imposing adobe building that made Clara's stomach clench with anxiety. She and Rowan climbed the steps together, Sarah and Samuel Cortez flanking them, a small army of 4 against whatever Henderson had marshaled. Inside, the courtroom was already half full. Henderson sat at one table with his lawyer, the weaselly man from Cooper's Creek, looking smugly confident. A handful of townspeople had made the journey to watch, their faces showing various degrees of curiosity and judgment. Judge Morrison, no relation to the Reverend, was a stern-looking man in his 60s who surveyed the room with evident distaste for the proceedings. He called the court to order and asked Henderson's lawyer to present his case. What followed was an hour of painful testimony. Henderson's lawyer painted Clara as a desperate woman who'd entered into a fraudulent marriage purely to circumvent legal challenges to her land ownership. He called witnesses who testified to seeing Rowan arrive at the ranch, to the unseemly haste of the marriage, to Clara's unfitness as a property owner. Clara sat rigid through it all, her hands clenched in her lap, Rowan's solid presence beside her, the only thing keeping her from flying apart. Then it was Cortez's turn. He called Sarah first, who testified clearly and passionately about Clara's character, her teaching abilities, and the genuine affection she'd observed between Clara and Rowan. The innkeeper from Tucson described the couple on their wedding night, nervous but clearly in love, treating each other with tenderness and respect. Finally, Cortez called Clara herself. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Henderson's lawyer immediately went on the attack. Mrs. Greyhawk, isn't it true you married Mr. Greyhawk specifically to prevent legal action against your property? No, Clara said firmly. No? You're saying the timing was purely coincidental? I'm saying I married Rowan because I love him, because he's my partner in every sense of the word. The legal protection was a benefit, but it wasn't the reason. Convenient, though, wasn't it? Objection, Cortez said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Morrison said, though he looked at Clara with sharp interest. Mrs. Greyhawk, in your own words, why did you marry the defendant? Clara took a breath, finding Rowan's eyes in the courtroom. He nodded slightly, encouraging. I married Rowan because he sees me as an equal, because he works beside me, not over me, because he stayed when everyone else left, because he fought floods and fixed fences and made me believe I didn't have to carry everything alone. Her voice strengthened. I married him because he's kind and patient and sees worth in me that the rest of this town seems determined to deny. I married him because I love him, Your Honor. Everything else is secondary to that." Silence fell in the courtroom. Henderson's lawyer looked frustrated, Judge Morrison thoughtful. Then the judge turned to Rowan. "Mr. Greyhawk, you have anything to add?" Rowan stood, his voice calm and clear. "Just that I love her too, Your Honor, that I'm proud to be her husband, and that our marriage is as real as any in this territory." Judge Morrison studied them both for a long moment, then shuffled his papers. "I've heard enough. I'll make my ruling now." Clara's heart stopped. Beside her, Cortez looked surprised. Apparently, judges didn't usually rule immediately. "This court finds," Morrison began, "that while the timing of this marriage may have been influenced by legal considerations, there is insufficient evidence to prove it was entered into fraudulently. The testimony presented shows a genuine relationship between the parties, supported by witnesses and documented properly according to territorial law." Henderson's face went purple with rage. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court is troubled by what appears to be an attempt to use legal proceedings to harass a properly married couple for reasons that seem to have more to do with personal grievance than legitimate legal concern. The challenge to the marriage is denied. The marriage stands as valid and legally binding." Relief crashed through Clara so powerfully she thought she might faint. Rowan's hand found hers, squeezing tight, and she heard Sarah's small sound of triumph from the gallery. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said sharply, "I strongly suggest you accept this ruling and cease your harassment of the Greyhawks. This court will not look kindly on further frivolous challenges. Are we clear?" Henderson's lawyer whispered urgently to him. Finally, the rancher nodded stiffly. "Clear, Your Honor." "Good. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and Clara found herself surrounded by embraces. Sarah hugging her fiercely, Cortez shaking Rowan's hand with genuine pleasure. They'd won. Actually won. The marriage was valid, the land secure, Henderson defeated. Outside the courthouse, in the bright Tucson sunshine, Clara turned to Rowan and kissed him in front of everyone, witnesses and strangers, and anyone who cared to look. Let them see. Let them know. This was real, this was hers, and no one could take it away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Rowan pressed his forehead to hers. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said. "Let's go home." The ride home from Tucson felt different than any journey Clara had made before. The desert stretched around them in familiar patterns, saguaro reaching toward the endless sky, mesquite casting sharp shadows, heat rising in waves from the baked earth. But she saw it all through changed eyes. This wasn't just the landscape she'd grown up in anymore. It was home in a way that felt earned rather than inherited, chosen rather than simply accepted. Rowan rode beside her, their horses moving in comfortable tandem, and every so often Clara would catch him watching her with an expression that made her chest warm. They'd won. Actually, legitimately won. Henderson's challenge had been defeated, their marriage validated by law and judge alike. The ranch was theirs, not just hers anymore, but theirs together. "What are you smiling about?" Rowan asked as they crested a familiar ridge. "Everything." Clara gestured broadly at the landscape. "All of it. The fact that we get to go home together. That home actually means something now." Meant something before. Not like this. She reined her horse closer to his. "Before it was just the place I was holding on to because I didn't know what else to do. Now it's ours. We built it together, defended it together. That's different." Rowan reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Yeah, it is." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, arriving at the ranch as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The cabin looked small and weathered in the fading light, the barn solid beside it, the fences standing straight where Rowan had repaired them months ago. Nothing had changed physically, but everything felt transformed. After tending the horses and doing the necessary evening chores, they collapsed onto the porch with cups of coffee, too tired to do more than sit close and watch the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky. "Sarah invited us to the spring dance," Clara said eventually, Happens every year in June. Whole town comes out. She thinks we should go. You want to? Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. Clara considered. The spring dance had always been a Cooper's Creek tradition, one night when the whole community gathered to celebrate surviving another winter, to dance and eat and pretend they were more than just scattered homesteads fighting the unforgiving land. She hadn't gone since her father died, hadn't felt welcome or wanted. But things were different now. I think I do, she said slowly. I think I want to walk in there with you, as your wife, and show them we're not going anywhere, that we're part of this community whether they like it or not. Rowan was quiet for a moment. It won't be easy. People will stare. Some might say things. Let them stare. Let them talk. Clara laced her fingers through his. I'm done hiding, done apologizing for choosing you. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours. All right then. Rowan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. We'll go to the dance, Zek. The weeks leading up to the spring dance settled into the rhythm Clara was learning to cherish. She spent her mornings at the schoolhouse, working with the younger children, watching them grow in confidence and ability. The teaching fed something in her soul she hadn't known was hungry. The joy of sharing knowledge, of watching young minds engage and expand. Sarah became a true friend, visiting the ranch regularly, bringing books and conversation and a perspective Clara valued deeply. The young teacher never judged, never questioned, just accepted Clara and Rowan's partnership as natural and right. Through her, Clara began to see that not everyone in Cooper's Creek was hostile to them. Some people were just quietly supportive, unwilling to make a fuss, but also unwilling to join the chorus of disapproval. The ranch itself thrived under their joint care. Rowan's patient work on the infrastructure meant things that had been failing now held strong. The irrigation system he'd redesigned brought water more efficiently to the garden, which flourished as it hadn't in years. Clara's careful tending of the animals meant the chickens laid reliably, the few remaining cattle stayed healthy, and they even acquired a pair of goats whose milk and cheese added variety to their diet. More than the physical improvements, though, Clara noticed the emotional shift. The ranch no longer felt like a burden she carried alone, but rather a project they built together. When a fence needed mending, Rowan was there. When the garden needed weeding, Clara could count on his help during the hottest parts of the day when outdoor work became unbearable. They moved around each other with practiced ease, anticipating needs, sharing labor, building something that felt sustainable in a way her solitary struggle never had. One evening, as they worked together preparing supper, Rowan said casually, "Been thinking about expanding the herd. Maybe buy a few more head of cattle now that the pastures can support them." Clara looked up from the vegetables she was chopping. "We'd need more hands for that. Cattle take constant work." "I know, but the land can handle it, and we could use the income." He paused. "Unless you think it's too much with your teaching." The fact that he consulted her, treated her opinion as essential rather than optional, still surprised Clara sometimes. "I think it's a good idea. We'd have to plan carefully, but if we bring in steady income from cattle sales, we could reinvest in the property. Maybe even build that new barn you've been sketching." "You notice those drawings?" "Hard not to when you leave them all over the kitchen table." Clara smiled. "I like the design. Big enough for the cattle we have, plus room to grow." They spent the rest of the evening planning, their conversation flowing easily between practical considerations and dreams for the future. This was partnership, Clara thought. Not grand romantic gestures, but the quiet work of building a life together, decision by decision, day by day. The night of the spring dance arrived warm and clear, the kind of perfect evening that made the harsh Arizona desert seem almost gentle. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, the blue one she'd worn to church what felt like a lifetime ago, now mended and cleaned until it looked almost new. She pinned her hair up with her mother's combs and studied herself in the small mirror, seeing a woman who looked stronger than the desperate, isolated person she'd been when Rowan first arrived. Rowan emerged from washing up in his cleanest clothes, his dark hair combed back, and Clara's breath caught. He looked handsome in the lamplight, all strong lines and quiet dignity, and she felt a surge of pride that this man was hers. "You're staring," Rowan said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You look nice." "So do you." He crossed to her, his hand settling at her waist. Beautiful, actually. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks but didn't look away. Think we're ready for this? Ready to dance with my wife in front of the whole town? Rowan's lips quirked. Looking forward to it. They drove to Cooper's Creek as the sun set, the buckboard rattling over familiar roads, both of them quiet with nervous anticipation. The dance was held in the largest barn in town, Henderson's barn, ironically, though the tradition predated his ownership and he could hardly refuse to host without causing offense. Music drifted through the evening air as they approached, fiddles and guitars creating a lively tune that made Clara's feet want to move. Lanterns hung from the barn's rafters, casting warm light across the assembled crowd. It seemed like everyone in Cooper's Creek and the surrounding homesteads had turned out, dressed in their best, ready to celebrate. Clara and Rowan stepped through the wide barn doors together, and conversation faltered. Heads turned, eyes stared. The fiddle player missed a note before recovering. For a moment, Clara's courage wavered. Then she felt Rowan's hand at the small of her back, steady and sure, and she lifted her chin. Sarah appeared at their side almost immediately, her smile bright and welcoming. You came! I'm so glad. Come on, I'll introduce you around. She led them through the crowd with determined cheerfulness, making introductions, refusing to acknowledge the awkward silences and uncertain responses. Some people were politely distant, others actively turned away. But a few, more than Clara expected, greeted them with genuine warmth. Mrs. Greyhawk, good to see you, said John Miller, Walter's son, extending his hand. And Mr. Greyhawk, fine work you've done on that ranch. Fences look solid. Thank you, Rowan said, shaking the younger man's hand. More people approached as the evening progressed, drawn by curiosity or courtesy or simple human decency. Clara found herself in conversations about teaching, about the ranch, about ordinary topics that had nothing to do with scandal or judgment. It wasn't acceptance exactly, not from everyone, but it was something. A cautious acknowledgement that she and Rowan existed, that they were part of the community whether everyone approved or not. When the music shifted to a slower tune, couples moved onto the makeshift dance floor. Rowan turned to Clara, extending his hand. May I have this dance? Clara's heart kicked hard. Dancing with Rowan meant making a public declaration, showing everyone exactly where they stood. It meant inviting judgment and commentary, and probably more gossip. She took his hand. Yes. They moved onto the floor together, and Rowan's arms came around her with easy confidence. He was a better dancer than she'd expected, leading her through the steps with gentle guidance. Clara relaxed into his embrace, letting the music carry them, aware of the stairs but no longer caring. You're doing great, Rowan murmured. So are you. I meant with all of this, the town, the dance. You're handling it better than I thought you would. Clara looked up at him, finding warmth in his dark eyes. That's because you're here. It's easier to be brave when I'm not alone. His arms tightened slightly. You're not alone. Not anymore. They danced through the song and into the next, and gradually Clara noticed other couples joining them on the floor, the initial shock of their presence fading into normalcy. They were just another married couple at the spring dance, nothing more scandalous than that. When they finally stepped off the floor, breathless and smiling, Clara caught sight of Tom Henderson watching from the corner. His expression was sour, defeated, and Clara felt a fierce satisfaction. He'd tried to break her, tried to take everything she had, and he'd failed. She and Rowan had survived his worst efforts and come out stronger. Let him watch. Let him see what real partnership looked like. The summer that followed the spring dance brought changes both subtle and profound. Word spread through the territory that the Greyhawks had successfully defended their marriage in court, that Judge Morrison himself had validated their union. It gave them a kind of legitimacy that social acceptance never could, legal standing that no amount of gossip could undermine. Slowly, grudgingly, Cooper's Creek began to make room for them. Not everyone welcomed them. Some people remained stubbornly opposed, crossing the street to avoid speaking, refusing to acknowledge Clara at the general store. But enough people softened their stance that Clara and Rowan no longer felt like complete outcasts. The school board officially hired Clara as Sarah's permanent assistant, a paid position that brought in steady income and gave Clara a sense of purpose beyond the ranch. She loved teaching, Loved watching children learn and grow, loved the intellectual challenge of finding new ways to explain difficult concepts. Rowan expanded the cattle herd as planned, buying 6 head from a rancher near Tucson. He hired occasional help from young men in town who needed work and didn't care who paid them. The ranch began to feel less like a dying legacy and more like a living enterprise, something that could actually support them long term. They worked hard through the summer heat, but they also made time for small pleasures. Evening rides to watch the sunset, stolen kisses in the barn, quiet conversations on the porch as stars filled the sky. The physical intimacy of their marriage deepened naturally, comfortably, both of them learning what pleased the other, what made them laugh or sigh or pull closer. One evening in late August, as they lay tangled together in bed, Clara said softly, "I think I might be pregnant." Rowan went completely still. "You think or you know?" "I'm late, and I've been feeling strange in the mornings." Clara placed her hand on her stomach, half afraid to hope. "I'm not certain yet, but—" Rowan's hand covered hers, his expression transforming with wonder. "A baby?" "Maybe. Probably." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the possibility. Are you asking if I'm happy?" Rowan laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Clara, I'm thrilled, terrified but thrilled." "Me too." She pressed closer to him. I wasn't sure we'd want children this soon. With everything still so uncertain, life's always uncertain. That doesn't mean we stop living it." Rowan kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "A baby. Our baby. That's everything." They held each other in the darkness, imagining the future that was suddenly taking shape. A child. Their child. Another generation to grow up on this land, to learn its rhythms and challenges, to carry forward the legacy of stubbornness and love that had brought Clara and Rowan together. Autumn arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of changing seasons. Clara's pregnancy became obvious enough that she couldn't hide it, and the news spread through Cooper's Creek with predictable speed. Some people offered congratulations. Others whispered that it proved the marriage had been legitimate all along. No one would go to such lengths for mere legal strategy. Sarah was delighted, immediately offering advice and baby clothes she'd saved from her younger siblings. Even Walter Miller, when Clara came into the general store for supplies, offered gruff congratulations and slipped an extra bag of sugar into her order without charge. "For the baby," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "My wife says pregnant women need sweet things." Clara thanked him, touched by the gesture despite their complicated history. The town was changing, or maybe she was changing how she moved through it. Either way, she felt less like an outsider and more like someone who'd simply claimed her right to exist on her own terms. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued teaching into her 6th month, finally stopping when climbing the schoolhouse steps became too difficult. She focused her energy on the ranch and preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets while Rowan built a cradle from salvaged wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard during long winter evenings. "What are you making?" Clara asked one night, watching his careful work. "Desert flowers," Rowan said, holding up the cradle to show her. Mesquite blossoms specifically. They bloom every spring, no matter how harsh the winter. Seemed fitting. Clara touched the delicate carvings, her throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful." "For our beautiful child." Rowan set down his tools and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair to place his hand on her swollen belly. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not in the last hour." "Terrible oversight. I love you, Clara Greyhawk, more every day." "I love you too." She ran her fingers through his hair, marveling at how natural the words had become. "More than I thought possible." Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that transformed the desert into something strange and magical. Clara grew larger, moving more slowly, relying on Rowan for tasks that had once been easy. He never complained, never made her feel like a burden. He just adjusted their routines, took on more work, and treated her changing body with reverence. In late February, as an unexpected cold snap gripped the territory, Clara's labor began. Sarah rode out to help, bringing the midwife from town, an older woman named Mrs. Chen who'd delivered half the babies in Cooper's Creek and approached pregnancy with brisk efficiency. First babies take time, Mrs. Chen said, examining Clara with practiced hands. Could be hours yet. Mr. Greyhawk, make yourself useful and keep that fire going strong. What followed was the longest night of Clara's life. Pain came in waves, building and cresting and receding only to build again. She gripped Rowan's hand through the contractions, drawing strength from his steady presence, his quiet encouragement. You're doing great, he murmured during a brief respite. So strong, so brave. Don't feel brave, Clara gasped. You are, anyway. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came. A daughter, red-faced and squalling, absolutely perfect. Mrs. Chen cleaned her efficiently and placed her in Clara's arms, the tiny weight settling against her chest like an answer to a question Clara hadn't known to ask. She's beautiful, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Rowan sat beside Clara on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, staring at their daughter with an expression of absolute wonder. She has your nose, he said softly, and your eyes. Clara touched the baby's dark hair, so like Rowan's. What should we name her? They'd discussed names endlessly, but never settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter in the golden light of early morning, Rowan said, Elena means light. Seems right. Elena, Clara repeated, testing the name. Elena Greyhawk. Yes, that's perfect. Mrs. Chen bustled around cleaning up, offering instructions for nursing and care that Clara tried to absorb through her exhaustion. Sarah made coffee and toast, forcing both new parents to eat. And through it all, Elena slept peacefully, oblivious to the miracle of her existence. The first weeks with Elena were simultaneously the hardest and most joyful of Clara's life. The baby demanded constant attention, nursing every few hours, crying for reasons Clara couldn't always decipher, needing to be held and soothed and changed. Clara stumbled through those early days in a fog of exhaustion, grateful for Rowan's help and Sarah's frequent visits. It gets easier, Sarah promised, rocking Elena while Clara tried to eat with both hands for the first time in days. My mother said the first 6 weeks are survival. After that, you start to figure each other out. Sarah was right. Gradually, Clara learned to read Elena's different cries, to anticipate her needs, to function on fragmented sleep. Rowan took over the nighttime diaper changes, bringing Elena to Clara for nursing and then walking her back to sleep when she fussed. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the challenges, celebrating small victories like Elena's first smile. Spring came to the desert with its usual explosion of color. Wildflowers bloomed across the property, and Rowan brought Clara mesquite blossoms like he had that first spring they'd worked together. But now Clara held their daughter while accepting the flowers, the moment layered with history and meaning. Remember when you first arrived? Clara asked one evening, Elena sleeping in her arms on the porch. I almost shot you. Rowan laughed. I remember. You were terrifying. Was not. Were too. Standing there with that rifle, looking like you'd actually use it, I almost rode on. What made you stay? He considered the question, his eyes on the sunset painting the desert in shades of amber and rose. Something in your eyes. You were scared and angry and determined all at once. I recognized that look. The look of someone fighting for something that mattered. He glanced at her. Thought maybe I could help. Didn't expect to fall in love. Me neither. Clara shifted Elena to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. But I'm glad you did. Glad we did. No regrets? Not a single one. They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened, 3 people who'd become a family through choice and effort and stubborn refusal to let the world's judgment define them. The ranch spread around them, fences strong, barn solid, garden flourishing in the spring warmth. It wasn't the same place Clara's father had built, but it was something better, something they'd created together, something that would continue to grow and change with time. Dad. The years that followed brought the kind of gradual transformation that's only visible in retrospect. Elena grew from infant to toddler to a precocious 5-year-old who loved helping in the garden and riding in front of her father on his horse. The ranch continued to thrive, the cattle herd growing to respectable size, the property yielding enough income to support them comfortably. Clara kept teaching, returning to the schoolhouse when Elena was old enough, bringing her daughter along to learn alongside the other children. The town's acceptance of the Greyhawks had evolved from grudging tolerance to genuine inclusion. When Henderson died of a stroke in 1889, his widow sold the ranch and moved back east, and no one mourned his passing enough to continue his vendetta. Sarah married John Miller in 1890, and Clara stood up as her witness, the friendship between the two women having deepened into something unbreakable. The Millers and the Greyhawks became close, their children playing together, their families supporting each other through the endless challenges of frontier life. Cooper's Creek grew slowly but steadily. New families arrived, bringing fresh perspectives and diluting the old prejudices. By the time Elena started school properly, her mixed heritage was simply a fact about her, no more remarkable than her brown eyes or quick laugh. One evening in the spring of 1892, Clara stood on the hill overlooking the ranch, watching Rowan and Elena work in the garden below. Elena was 7 now, tall for her age, her dark hair catching the late afternoon sun as she bent to pull weeds beside her father. Their voices drifted up to Clara, Rowan explaining something about soil composition, Elena asking a dozen questions in response. Clara touched the headstones beside her, her mother's, her father's, both weathered now by years of sun and wind and rain. "We did it," she said softly. "Held on to the land, built something that will last. I think you'd be proud." The wind moved through the juniper tree, and Clara chose to hear agreement in its rustling. Walking back down the hill, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperate isolation to this full, rich life. It hadn't been easy. There'd been moments of doubt, fear, anger, times when she'd wondered if she'd made the right choices, if the cost was too high. But watching Rowan look up as she approached, his face lighting with the smile he reserved just for her, feeling Elena crash into her legs with a hug and a breathless story about finding a lizard, this was worth it, all of it. "Mama, can we have stew for dinner?" Elena asked, bouncing with energy. "We can," Clara agreed, taking her daughter's hand. Rowan fell into step on her other side, his hand finding hers naturally. They walked to the house together, a family bound by choice and love, and the daily work of building a life worth living. The cabin door stood open, lamplight spilling out into the deepening twilight. Clara paused on the threshold, looking back at the land one more time. The ranch her parents had carved from the desert, the home she and Rowan had defended and expanded, the legacy they were creating for Elena and whatever children might follow. It was never just about the land, Clara realized. It was about what the land represented, the right to choose your own path, to build your own life, to love who you loved without apology. That was the real inheritance her parents had given her. That was what she and Rowan would pass on to their children. "You coming?" Rowan asked from inside. Clara smiled and stepped through the door, closing it gently behind her. Outside, the desert settled into night, stars emerging one by one in the vast sky. Inside, warmth and laughter and the comfortable sounds of family filled the small cabin. This was home. Not because of the building or the land, though both mattered, but because of the people she shared it with, because of the life they'd built together against the odds, because of love that had started with a stranger at the gate and become something unshakable. Clara Greyhawk, once Clara Whitfield, alone and desperate, moved to the stove to start dinner, her husband setting the table, her daughter underfoot asking questions, and felt completely, perfectly content. The ranch would continue, the land would endure, and the story they'd written together of courage and partnership and love that transcended judgment would live on in the daughter who carried both their names, both their blood, both their stubborn refusal to let the world tell them who they could be. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Elena was grown with children of her own, she would ask her mother about those early days, about what it was like to stand alone against the town, to marry for love when the world said it was wrong, to fight for land and dignity and the right to live on her own terms. And Clara would smile, her hand finding Rowan's across the table, both of them silver-haired now, weathered by years but still strong, and she'd say simply, "We just loved each other. Everything else came from that." It was the truest answer she had. Love wasn't magic that solved all problems or erased all difficulties. But it was the foundation they'd built everything else on. The partnership that had sustained them through drought and flood, gossip and legal battles, hard work and harder choices. Love and the daily decision to choose each other, again and again and again. That was the real story. Not the dramatic confrontations or legal victories, but the quiet accumulation of shared moments, coffee on the porch at dawn, hands meeting across the dinner table, bodies finding each other in the darkness, voices raised in laughter, or argument, or simple conversation. The story of a life built together, one day at a time, until the days became years and the years became a lifetime. And at the end of that lifetime, when Rowan finally passed in his sleep at 83, Clara held his hand and whispered thank you for stopping at her gate all those years ago. Thank you for staying when he could have left. Thank you for seeing her not as a scandal or a problem, but as a partner worth fighting beside. She buried him on the hill next to her parents, beneath a mesquite tree he'd planted decades earlier. And she stayed on the ranch they'd built together, teaching her grandchildren to tend the land, to value partnership over possession, to choose love even when it's hard. The land endured, the ranch continued, and the story of Clara and Rowan Greyhawk became the kind of legend families tell around dinner tables, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. They'd found each other against the odds. They'd built something that lasted. They'd loved fiercely and completely, refusing to let judgment or fear or difficulty diminish what they had. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered.